to Digital Transformation Survivors, the podcast that talks to industry professionals about their challenges, learning how to manage complex web estates. I'm your host, Julian Tedstone, and I'm the Managing Director for Coherence. We specialise in figuring out how businesses manage complex websites or website portfolios, so that environments where maybe you have multiple sites or applications serving different markets, different audiences, or stages in a user journey. And I guess the point of this podcast is to explore this unique challenge and to learn from those that have an interesting perspective. And they could be technologists, they could be business leaders, they could be marketing practitioners. So we want to talk to everybody. And today, I'm very excited to introduce our guest, Filip Bech-Larsen. Filip is the Chief Technology Officer for Umbraco CMS. And if you haven't heard of Umbraco, well, where have you been? It probably powers some of your favorite sites. So Domino's Pizza, Mercedes-Benz, Carlsberg Group. It's a really powerful open source CMS on the .NET framework, supported by a volunteer community of over 200,000 developers. So who better than Filip to help us navigate this territory? And just a note to say that today's show is brought to you with our partners, Moriyama, who specialise in Umbraco. So Filip, welcome to Digital Transformation Survivors. How are you doing this morning?
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. I'm doing really well. It's a nice day. It's almost Christmas time now at the time of the recording, but it's good. I'm happy.
Great, good to hear it. Yeah, we are feeling especially festive here. We're in festive mood here on Digital Transformation Survivors, really getting into the Christmas spirit at the time of recording. So welcome. So Filip, did I leave anything out about from the introduction? Is there something else that I should have added in there?
Well, I mean, Umbraco is, as you said, a very big and popular .NET open source CMS, but we are backed by a professional company. We run a cloud offering that kind of is our that pays the bills and allows us to grow as a company and invest in the open source product. So while the core product is free and open source and you can take it and use it with no strings attached, we do have a professional offerings for hosting and support and all this stuff, and that's what keeps the wheels turning. So, and that's why big businesses, shouldn't be worried about, building on top of Umbraco, because we're not going away. Actually, we've been growing pretty steadily, 25% per year the last 10 years or something. So it's a very nice growth journey in our end.
That's a really interesting story in itself, isn't it, Filip? Because it wasn't that long ago. Probably both you and I can remember when open source was treated with some caution, perhaps, in the enterprise community, and over time that's completely reversed. I mean, if we get just as a start, what does that journey look like, and how have you seen things change during your time working within this sector?
Yeah, man, you're totally right. Like, if you look at us as an example. 10 years ago, we were five guys in a basement or that kind of business, right? And how did enterprise actually trust us 10 years ago? That's pretty crazy to think about. But some of them did and took the plunge, and I think those are probably the ones that are the most happy. Like they've seen their investment, really pay off. They've gotten so much more of a mature product. But I mean, yeah, as you said, like a few years ago, open source could be kind of seen as a risk, and today I think people are realizing, especially enterprises are realizing, that it's actually like the superpower. It's what makes it your product safe and user friendly and all of this stuff, that there's more people contributing. It's not just the people in the ivory tower that makes all the decisions, but there's actually a community around and people helping and many more bugs being found and reported and fixed, so it's not just unknown bugs everywhere in the software, because I mean there's always going to be bugs in software, whether you're open source or a closed source product, but I think one of the powers of Umbraco is that we have a strong user base that really helps us weed them out, and helps us even sometimes, because it's open source, they actually help us fix it as well, and so that's pretty unique. Of course, the only exception, if I should say so, is around security. I mean, that's the obvious one where people can be afraid. So we have a very stringent process for how we deal with security issues, so that's not out in the public before it's actually fixed. And of course, if you're in our own cloud offering, like we roll out security updates before we publish what the problem is. But yeah, so I think we're in a pretty good spot, and I think that my claim would be that open source is actually probably more secure than closed source in most cases, because when there's bugs or when there's security issues, they're found and then they're made public, and that means we need to fix them really quickly. So it's not something that can just lie dormant because no one knows or because only a few people knows. So I think we're in a pretty good spot with that, and I think that's what enterprises have been realizing over the last 3, 4, 5 years, that it's actually a strength.
And that's really fascinating. It's a fascinating journey. And it feels like it's as you say, it's happened over the past 10, 15 years. Give us, can you paint a picture for us of what I guess the Umbraco universe looks like now? What types of web application is Umbraco serving? What types of user experience is it delivering? And particularly from the perspective of looking at kind of complex web estates and trying to help businesses that maybe are dealing with multiple markets, multiple business units, different audiences, or different stages in the user journey. What type of experiences can we see being supported by Umbraco today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the beauty, but also sometimes the weird thing about Umbraco is that it is everything for everybody, or like it's a lot of things for a lot of different people. Like, so it's the hairdresser website that's on the corner of your street, right? And then it's also the Fortune 500 company that powers a huge multi-billion-dollar thing on top of it. So it's everything in between. In terms of like big enterprises, one of the I really like when we can bring you the foundation to help to solve like your specific problem. You mentioned Carlsberg as a customer as an example earlier, and like I think that's a really good example of a customer that really bought into what Umbraco gives them and kind of utilizes that. So breweries, they buy up other breweries all the time, and they buy 20 new brands, and that means they need to have 20 more websites to run. And I mean, instead of having 8 of them in WordPress and 20 in Umbraco and 18 in Sidecore, and like they've kind of chosen like, here's an Umbraco template that we can run out over everything. And then like we have a feature in our cloud offering where you can spin up duplicates of a site and then do modifications, and then you can still do changes to the master and push them back out. So like they have a very powerful setup like that, and it really empowers them to have like unique identities for all of their brands, but still have one kind of baseline that powers all of it, where you can bring out new features and where you can do updates, so everything's safe and fast and up to speed, right? So I think that's a very nice kind of case story for us, right? But there's plenty of stories also about big companies doing e-commerce on top of Umbraco, or doing even not websites on top of Umbraco. I mean, with the recent move to headless for everything, there's obviously people using Umbraco to power apps, but also like smart fridges and IoT devices, and like there's no limits because it's free and open source, and you can just download it, and it's very power effective. Like you have people running it on a Raspberry Pi like inside of an IoT device or something. Like you can run it anywhere, and that's really one of the powers of Umbraco, right? So there's so much. There's so many use cases. It's I think one of the hardest parts for us is sometimes to do the classic ICP, the ideal customer profile, because like what is the ideal customer profile for Umbraco? Like so I think more often than not we do that the other way around, and we look at who's actually using us, and like where do we see the segments, like who do we see using us, and how can we help them even more.
That's just conjured in my mind the image of a major international brand running their web estate from a Raspberry Pi, which I think would be would be a rather lovely thing
Yeah.
if if
I
the pie
mean,
were big enough,
with
perhaps.
all the talk of sustainability and carbon being emitted from data centers and stuff, I think there's actually a good point to trying to minimize the resources that you need to run websites. I think probably taking it to a Raspberry Pi is probably a little too extreme, but the fact that you can, I think, is kind of nice, and yeah, we're seeing some nice also on in terms of sustainability, some nice numbers as we improve on Braco.
So I heard you speak recently in London, and I was really struck by I guess, the range of features in Umbraco. And I guess a takeaway for me was just how closely those features were aligned with not just the developer experience, but the editor experience as well. And obviously, ultimately in support of the user experience. It would be great if you could just replay some of those features for us, Philip. It would be really interesting just to understand what's underneath the hood in Umbraco, and how does it help us to manage complicated web estates, and maybe a little bit about what the motivation for some of those features were. How did they come about? I think it would be a really interesting topic.
Sure. Um, yeah, I think as I was saying in London a few months ago, like I think what we've been seeing in the last couple of years have been the move from the suite kind of setup to a more composable setup, and that evolution will definitely go on, and with the change to headless and like all of that kind of points in the same direction. And I think a lot of a lot of that is really good. But in many setups that I see with enterprises today, it's really been kind of at the expense of the editor. So the IT guys or the architecture guys or whoever draws up all the nice drawings, like they've gotten all of their separation of concern and all of the cool best of breed kind of approaches, but it's really made it more complex for the editors. So like the classic example is the e-commerce content editor that needs to change something on a landing page. They would need to go to the PIM or the product information management system to maybe update some text copy, and then they would need to go to some kind of DAM or digital asset management to upload a new product picture, and then they would need to go to the CMS to pick the product from the PIM and pick the media and like create some other landing page copy, and like it's just like that weird combination where you need to go to multiple different systems, and I really don't like that. I really like specialized systems. I really buy into best of breed, and definitely like the people who work on products should do it in the product management, like in the PIM and not in the CMS, not anywhere else. Like they should use specialized systems. But when you're the person that needs to pull from other sources, that experience can be so much better than today. And what we see a lot of times is that the people who try to solve this, there's a lot of people, a lot of projects where they just don't care, and the developers just have it, or like the developers have like they have an easy time, and the editors have a terrible time. And I mean, sometimes that's a valid, use of resources. That's up to you. I'm not gonna blame anybody, but I'm just saying like what we do see though is that when people try to fix this, it very quickly becomes like that tight like that tight connection between the systems, and that's kind of what you're trying to avoid when you're building Composable. Like we don't want the CMS to be tightly coupled to the PIM or something like this. So we're trying to think about like how can we make this generic enough? How can we maybe combine one mechanism that can also serve content for your websites from all the sources, but also help the editor actually work a lot better with this. So that's one of the products that we kind of have in mind. We don't have any products on this yet, but that's kind of the approach that we take. Because I mean, as you said earlier, like it is really more a people thing or like a human thing than it's a technology thing. Like all the tech stuff we can fix. People like there's smart people everywhere. We can fix all of this, but let's focus on building something that is human centered and that's built around, letting editors, empowering them to actually achieve what it is that they want to do, that they want to build, right? So I think that's at the core of what we want to do, and I think that's basically what I
Yeah.
spent 30 minutes talking about when you heard me talking last.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that came across really powerfully in that presentation. And there's a phrase in there that I think you've used a couple of times, and I know a lot of people in our line of work spend a lot of time thinking about and trying to do the best about, and that's composable. And I I've heard it used in several different ways, and um, I think it's a really interesting topic just to pull apart a little bit. What does composable mean to you? Why is it important?
So if you look at it like from what it's supposed to be and what it is that we say it is and want it to be, then it is about, choosing the best of breed system. So like instead of choosing one suite that gives you marketing and commerce and products and sales and ERP and like all of this stuff from one vendor, you just get to compose kind of your own setup and say like, I want this ERP because that's the best one for me. And then I want this marketing engine, and then I want this commerce engine and this PIM, and like choose from whatever shelf you want. And then the idea of composable is that then you can kind of compose your own setup and marry it all together. And I mean, there's a lot of good arguments for that. Not only can you like choose the best one, but also because like typically like the lifetimes are different. Like if your web estate lives a different length than your ERP. Hopefully you don't switch your ERP every year or every other year, and hopefully you probably, or maybe you actually do that on your website. Like you want to have a design update, or maybe add a new brand or something. You do that every year maybe, and like decoupling those is absolutely a big business win when you do it right. But as I was saying, like what we do see a lot of things, a lot of times is that the systems get too tightly coupled, and that means that you're effectively having all of the bad things from the sweet days where everything was tightly tightly coupled, but you also have all of the bad things from the composable setup, where it does become a lot more complicated when there's multiple systems and they don't might maybe work out of the box with each other, and you have to build integrations and you have to do all of this stuff. And typically, it's also a lot more expensive to run the composable way because, like, instead of buying one license, you have to buy 9 different licenses, and they all have to make a margin, and they'll all raise their prices every year. And like, yeah, so in the worst of all cases, like you just get all of the bad things of both. So you get the big bill, you get all of the complexity, and you still have something that is tied together where you can't change one without the other and stuff. So it's so that's the kind of the broken promise. I've heard people starting to talk about like composable regret as a thing that's trending on Twitter or X or whatever. Like as people starting to talk about all the downsides of this. But I still think the ideas hold. I think we want to achieve what we wanted to achieve with composable. But uh, I think there's a better way to actually be pulling data together from sources and staying true to this. We see some agencies building kind of this composer or like orchestrator in the middle that actually takes care of all of these and keeps the systems separate, and so you keep the promise of it. The problem I think today with is that if that product or if that orchestrator is a custom built thing, then you kind of lose all the freedom of composable, because then you're just tied into that one. Like you're tied into that, like it's even a double login, because you're logged into the products, but you're also logged into the agency or whoever built that orchestrator for you, right? So I think the right kind of login is to have that orchestrator as a product, like as a product that you buy, and that you can, where you can pick and mix, and you can plug in your sources, and it will just work. Of course, that's never how it actually is. But I think that's the vision that we should be striving towards, right? That's the one that you choose, and that's the one that you knowingly can't just change every other year. Like this is the one that keeps all of your sources, separate but connected. And I think that's where we need to kind of go. That was a long speech. I'm sorry, but that's
That was
I think that I'm trying to kind of say like there's definitely really really good things and really good intentions behind composable, but that composable regret is definitely a thing. Like people are seeing the complexity and the cost really rising, and trying to do their best. Like I've built Composable before. Like before I joined Umbraco, I was on the agency side and like helping big customers doing this, and it's really difficult. And there's not a lot of good products in that space right yet. And I think Umbraco will one day have a product there. We don't have it yet, but I think we one day will.
Okay, you heard it here, folks. Watch this space. That's where we're headed. We're really excited. So, I think picking some stuff out of that, I think it sounds like there's stuff that you want to be kind of tightly governed, and then there's stuff where you want to have developers, implementers, agencies, technologists. You want them to have a lot of freedom. And I think that's one of the observation about highly performing, very very successful open source communities like Umbraco, and there's the Drupal community as well, a number of other communities. Don't want to leave anybody out, but one of the things that I think they do well, or that is important to them, is to find that balance about what you apply a very strict governance layer to. So, for example, you mentioned security. So we're going to have a very very strong point of view on security and how we manage that, or we're going to have a point of view on what that orchestration capability might look like, because we don't feel that that should be a very very bespoke solution. But then on the other hand, that you want to have areas where the implementers can be very free with the technology, and they can choose from this vast suite of capabilities that the 200,000 open source developers are contributing to. So that's a really interesting balance between the kind of the governance side and then the freedom side of things. It'd be interesting to know, how do you navigate that, and what are some of the, I guess, the thought processes that go into deciding what you put into a tightly governed box and what you kind of, make more free.
Yes, I think obviously the actual user experience of the website is the one thing that should be completely free for the editor. Free as in flexible, and I mean hopefully also free. I think that's eventually, or like initially, that's where Umbraco really shined, and that's where we got a lot of attraction in the beginning. 10 years ago, most CMSs really had an opinion about what the website should be looking like. Remember, if you downloaded WordPress or Drupal or Typo 3 or any of the other open source products out there 10 years ago, like you were kind of forced into this and you couldn't change the markup of things. And like Umbraco has always been about giving you as an editor or as a developer all the tools and allowing you to change anything. And I mean, I think that was why we became successful in the beginning, and we're trying to stay true to that. So give you all the flexibility that you need as a developer. So in Umbraco, we really try to give you lots of flexibility as a developer, but we try to keep that balance between still giving the content editors a nice experience. So we don't want it to be like, we don't want developers to be so flexible that they can just make terrible editor experiences, right? Like they shouldn't be telling editors to write HTML or something. Like they should have a good experience from moving around pages or blocks inside of a page, like stuff like that should be intuitive to editors. And I think we've kind of solved that. And then as you said, like then there's all the foundational stuff that just needs to be stable. Like we think of Umbraco as a platform where like you build your house on top, but like the foundation is what we offer, and you can count on that being completely stable. That doesn't move, it doesn't shake, it doesn't break, and that's what you want from your foundation, right? I was building a house recently, and that's definitely what you want from a foundation. Like there shouldn't be cracks. It shouldn't be revolutionary. Like there's no revolution in a foundation. Like that's the point. And I mean, if I can just go on a tangent from that one, that's one of the things that people have been asking me probably the last 12, 18 months, like, when is Umbraco gonna do something on AI? Why don't we have AI yet? And my point is like, we are trying to be the stable foundation. Like we cannot add something to this and then take it away in 6 months because no one is using it, or because we found out that it's going to be something else that wins this battle or something like this. So in AI as well, like we give you the foundation, and then there's a vast ecosystem out there. We have the marketplace in Umbraco where there's tons of packages already that puts AI on top of Umbraco. And I think that's really where it's supposed to be. Like, we should give you the foundation, we should give you the toolbox that you can build with. You can, bring your own hammer if you don't like ours, but you can build a pretty great house with just our tools, right? And then if you want to, there's a big ecosystem out there. As I said, like on the marketplace, I think we've crossed 400 and something packages. So there's plenty of add-ons to Umbraco that helps you get started quickly, that helps you, demo something to a client or whatever you want to do. And many of these packages are actually also open source. So if you're just curious about how is this built, you can probably just download the source and take a look at it. I think it's obviously a very developer, focused approach on that. But I think at the end of the day, the tech stuff should be for developers, and then it should be enablers for the content editors. So the content editors shouldn't really care about what is native Umbraco and what is the package, and that's also why we can get away with, I hope, saying that AI is not something that should be in the core. It should be something, at least for now, that you add to your product, that you add to your project that you're building for a specific use case. So you choose what's right for this setup, and then you can choose something else for another setup. And then, in a few years, when we've seen kind of AI as well mature, and people have found out what's the good way to build this, then we figure out now it's in a place where it's stable. Maybe it can become part of the foundation, or maybe we can do something to make it easier for you to build on top of it. So that's that was a lot of there was a lot of tangents on tangents. I'm sorry about that, but I think that's kind of how we think about. What should be flexible, what should be for everybody to tinker with, and what should be stable and not something you should try to change.
I love that. It's like a late adopter model. So rather than rushing in, it's like, okay, well, let's wait and see how this pans out, and then we can work out where the value is, and then we can we can add that into the core if it's appropriate.
And I think that's what you want from somebody that you build on top of, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want them to be predictable. So one of the things we've changed in the last few years in Umbraco is to put our releases on a completely fixed cadence. So I can tell you what date 8 years from now that Umbraco, whatever 27 or whatever version will be out there. I can tell you the exact dates today because it's on a schedule. We exactly what's coming, when it's coming. All of this stuff. And that, as an agency, as an enterprise, that's what you want. You want it to be predictable. You want to make decisions based on what you can see coming. We've always said that, open source for us is not really about democracy. It's not about saying if you have enough votes, then you can get a feature in. No, we still decide what goes in the product. But it's about transparency. It's about us being completely transparent about our ambitions. Most of our competitors would never tell you about a product that they're maybe thinking about building, right? That's counterintuitive to most businesses, but it's true. It's who we are. We want to be transparent. We want you to think with us. We want you to be able to, be predictable for you, so you can plan accordingly. It's you shouldn't really have any surprises. And then we've taken the tech side of the releases as well, and we've aligned the release cycle closely to Microsoft. So we, as you said in the beginning, we depend very heavily on the .NET platform from Microsoft. So we've aligned our release cadence with theirs. So whenever there's a new LTS version or long-term support version of .NET, then a few weeks after, then there's a new long-term support version of Umbraco that runs on the newest version. So your developers will always have the newest tech to work on, so they won't be held back due to tech, but they won't be, as I said, they won't be getting AI features before we consider them ready for everybody, right? So that's the trade-off that we're trying to make.
And I think that's really insightful. If you are a large brand or house containing many brands, consumer good brands, operating in different geographical markets, talking to different linguistic audiences, selling different products, different content strategies. different modes of measurement, different product sets. You've got a lot of moving parts, haven't you, in your web
Yes.
estate? There's a lot to think about, and I guess the one thing that you don't want is any kind of unpredictability around that foundation. You want to be able to, I guess, address your markets in ways that are appropriate to each one of those markets. But you really want the underpinning foundation to be really, really stable. And you want to know, okay, we're going to be hitting an upgrade that's going to be coming in 8 months' time. We know the support that will be available for the previous version, how long that will be. So all of that, I think, that's almost like a really important piece of hygiene, isn't it, for a large enterprise making that investment and then looking at an open source model. They need to have that combination of the predictable along with all the freedom that they get in the code.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. I think that is something that is often overlooked when you're looking at when you're evaluating your vendors, right? Like how transparent are they about processes and do they actually do what they say they do and ship on time and don't ship anything that's not finished and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think we've all been guilty in our space around we laughingly call it conference driven development or like keynote driven development where you build all your features so you can launch them at a big event because everybody loves a big Apple style keynote where you can stand in front of everybody and say today and all of that stuff. And it's like we're really trying to make it kind of a virtue to not do that, to say like, yes, so we have our annual developer conference and obviously it's a big highlight for us and we prepare religiously and have big keynotes and all of this stuff, but it is like we stay true to the release frequency and the cadence that we have. And that meant that last year I had to stand on stage and present something that was released 2 weeks ago because that's where the schedule was. And that it's kind of I try to make it a virtue because I think it's really a power. But it does make kind of the keynote effect go away a little bit when everybody already knows what's coming, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's equally challenging when very ambitious features are announced. Particularly for open source communities, where I guess you have to set a direction for a large number of people that maybe working on their own timelines, and then it's very difficult then to say, okay, this feature is going to be available on this date. Because there are so many moving parts in that process. I guess that's a real challenge in terms of managing the roadmap.
Yeah. So our approach is that we don't tie a feature to a specific version. We say we'll be working on this feature in Q1 or in whatever in May or something, and then the point is when the feature is ready, we put it in the next release. Yeah. So that meant that we had a big feature that we had planned, that we had hoped for shipping in May, and it wasn't ready in May, and then it was a breaking change, so we needed to wait for a new major version, and the major versions comes out twice a year, so the whole feature had to wait 6 months. And that's the downside of it, obviously, that maybe we could have shipped it earlier. Maybe we shouldn't, but maybe it was actually a lot better because it matured and it got more ready. And like, I think everybody won from that decision. But that is, of course, the downside of it. So that sometimes, like, when you stick to a cadence and you stick to not shipping something before it's ready, then sometimes you need to, wait for the next window.
Yeah. I'd like to talk a little bit about how we can help, enterprises, large brands, make good decisions and be effective in their technology planning. And just a couple of observations to kind of frame this discussion. It seems that replatforming or migrating a web estate, so multiple sites, from one platform to another, seems even today to be a huge traumatic career-ending activity. for for many, well, not career ending, but career threatening
Yes.
activity for for many who seek to update or to move or to make a to improve the consumer experience, to adhere to the highest accessibility standards, user experience standards, to get the best data, the most transparency in their systems, to be pushing all of that, to be making really good choices, and then to be implementing those choices in an effective way. It seems that brands still can get into 1 year, 2 year, 3 year replatforming exercises, and that feels like a challenge that is still with us as an industry, and it'd be really good to get your perspective on that and how we can help both enterprises and implementation partners and technology providers like yourself. How do we all need to make better decisions in terms of preparing for these big digital transformation projects?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's definitely something that we do see, and we still see, that that projects go over time, go over budget. That it's really hard to plan, and especially as you say, like when it's not just one website, but when it's like a whole bunch of websites or a whole portfolio of brands or something like this that you want to move, it's difficult. I think like if we're staying in the kind of the house building metaphor, I think there's something in like having some bricks or some parts that you can kind of share between multiple estates. I think that's super important, and probably building your own kind of foundation on top of whatever foundation you have. So I mean, there's a lot of things that we talk about today. Like you talked about accessibility. I would probably throw in sustainability as well, like as an important thing. And these are the kind of things that are super hard to retrofit. And so it's super hard to do after the fact. But if you like, if you pay attention when you start out, it doesn't really take much longer to do things right. Like instead of doing them wrong and then fixing them. So I think setting up some guidelines, some best practices, giving out some tools. In Umbraco, we've been working with kind of a UI library that gives you like UI components for anything that you want. Like we have a UI library that powers everything inside of Umbraco CMS. So like in the back office where you sit and click around, like the drop downs and the buttons and the everything. And we use that same library that has been accessibility tested and performance tested, and that has been continuously developed on. We use that same UI library like inside of our cloud portal where you go to spin up a new cloud environment, and like it's the same button, and it's actually the same code that runs the button. So it's not just a button that looks the same, but it's actually the same button. So when there's an accessibility fix to one, it's also a fixed on the other one, right? So I think there's like you can make a lot of things easier for yourself if you think about it that way. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't have that kind of setup and you want to introduce that kind of setup, that will take time. There is a lot of things to be built and to be considered and to be probably reconsidered and rebuilt. Like there's a lot of things in where like when you're building that kind of project that just takes time. But the point is like if you then come to that point, then from there on, adding the extra brand, changing a brand, changing the design, all of these things should be a lot simpler from there. But I don't know if there is a magic bullet to get you there, because I mean, there's probably templates you can download. There's stuff that has done a lot of this for you, but are they specific enough for your setup? Maybe they are, maybe they're not. I think if you're a smaller company, that's probably a good bet to start out with that, because you do get a lot of like a long way down the line, and maybe the small customizations are not worth it if you're a smaller company. But if you are a big enterprise, then probably building it right, building it yourself is probably sometimes the right thing, and that I think that just will take time. I think like cutting corners is only gonna be a foot gun that makes it worse. Like that makes you have to repeat it again in 2 years when you have to rebrand, because if you haven't done it right, then you need to redo it. But if you do it right, then the next time that's where the investment pays back, right?
And I think that's
Yeah, so that's I think that's not a good story for how to solve it today, but I think that's how we solve it for tomorrow, right?
yeah,
Like it's building it better this time.
yeah. Well, I think it's a pragmatic and it's a realistic message, which is making a very I guess clear-eyed decision about where you make your investment as an enterprise. So
Yeah,
I guess you don't want to be reinventing the wheel around the core principles, the things that are baked into the foundations. So I love your metaphor of the house. So
yeah,
you know, there's no point in reinventing the foundations because Umbraco has got really, really strong foundations. But I guess your investment is going to be where those foundations meet the the user experience. So all of those areas. You spoke there about the UI capability and that kind of modular way of looking at the world. So you build it once and you then cascade it everywhere. So if you're making, for example, an accessibility enhancement or a sustainability enhancement, that's going to be done once, and then it's going to flow out to every single site, every single language, every single content type, and I guess that's where you make the
I mean,
investment.
yeah, exactly. Building your own UI library is a lot of work,
Yeah.
and I think that's probably where like you need to be a pretty sizable organization before that makes sense.
Mm.
It makes sense for us because we build a product that is used so widely, so many places, and like that's how we maintain it. And I think it makes sense for us, but for most even kind of large enterprises, it might not make sense. Uh, but then there's plenty of them out there that are pretty good. You can use ours if you want to. It's built for customizations as well. So if you don't like the rounding on the edges of our buttons, you can just change the rounding and still use the UI library. If you don't like the colors, you can just change the colors and still use all of that. And I mean, we got a lot of inspiration in all transparency and putting fame where it should be. We got a lot of inspiration for our UI library from the Spectrum library from Adobe. Like they build a UI library that they use in Photoshop and like everywhere, like Photoshop Web and everywhere that they do, and that's really really well built. And we got a lot of inspiration from that, and we chose a lot of the same tech stacks and stuff like that from the UI library. So putting a little bit of glory to them, I think they've done a wonderful job. And if as an enterprise, like you're looking for something to extend upon or to work on, I think that's a really good place to start out. Um, I'm sure if you Google Spectrum and Adobe, you can find it.
Well, yeah, well, absolutely, absolutely wonderful. And all the investment that goes into the user behavior and the user research behind these different libraries, leveraging them becomes a really powerful thing. And I guess to those listening in on this, it's also worth noting that they're I guess highly configurable to the brand experience and to the user experience. So you might be using a button feature to use your analogy that is modular, that is based on certain kind of behavioral principles from the UI library, but at the same time, it's completely adapted to the brand execution. It's in line with the user experience principles of the system. So all of those things feel like they're kind of owned by the enterprise, but the underlying kind of framework there bakes in a lot of the assumptions about what a good user experience should look like.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a pretty good consensus around like, don't change what a drop down is. Like people know
Yeah,
how to use a drop down. Like you click it and then there's a list and you can scroll inside of the list and you can use your keyboard, your arrows to go up and down and you can select with tab or with space or with enter. And like if you try to implement that yourself, you're definitely not going to get all of that right.
yeah,
And that just means that if you then have a user who's visually impaired or something, like they know how to use a drop down. So like don't try to build your own drop down. Don't try to build your own date picker. Like don't like that doesn't do anything for your brand to have a custom one,
mm,
unless you have you know we're the funky ones, we're the weird ones, so our drop down is actually then that's fine. And but then please spend all the money to build it right so
yeah,
the blind people can still use it. But I mean the point is, think about where it makes sense to make your brand stand out. It might make sense to make beautiful buttons that say exactly who you are, and that's what people push to put something in your basket or something like that. By all means, do that. Make that special. Make that great. But as I said, like, don't try to reinvent what a drop down is or what a date picker is or something like that. You spend your money on where it makes sense for your brand, right?